right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Thank you so much for joining us for our second public meeting of the National Commission of Military, National, and Public Service. My name is Janine Davidson, and I am one of the 11 commissioners, and I'll be your MC for today's meeting. I, along with my fellow commissioners, am very excited to welcome you to our second public meeting. I'm specifically excited to be here, that we are here in Colorado, given that I've spent quite some time here. I went to college at the University of Colorado in Boulder. I taught at the Air Force, thank you. I taught at the Air Force Academy, and now I'm back here as the president of MSU Denver. So it's really great to have the commissioners here to share that. Additionally, happy National Volunteer Week. It's an honor for the commissioners and myself to be in Denver, Colorado during this special week. Before I begin, I want to take this time to thank all of the individuals who have volunteered their time and support for the communities this year and also this week. National Volunteer Week is about inspiring, encouraging, and recognizing people to seek out imaginative ways to engage and give back in their communities. It's about demonstrating to the nation that by working together, we have the fortitude to meet our challenges, both big and small. For our meeting today, we will begin with two guest speakers, an overview of the commission here, followed by a brief panel discussion with distinguished individuals who embody service. Then we want to hear from you and begin a conversation about service. On your chairs, you have a card that looks like this. So if you would, please write down any thoughts or ideas you have that you want to share with us today during today's meeting and before you leave the museum. Please share anything you hear today on social media and with your networks, those of whom were unable to join us today. We are at Inspire to Serve US, that's a 2, Inspire with the number 2, Inspire to Serve US. And to join the conversation online, use the hashtag Inspire to Serve. So to kick off our meeting, I would like to introduce our wonderful and very gracious host, the President and CEO of the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, Mr. George Sparks. Mr. Sparks has been the President and CEO of the museum since 2004, and prior to that, he spent 24 years in the electronics measurements business at Hewlett-Packard and Agilent Technologies. Mr. Sparks also spent 9 years in the Air Force, like me, as a pilot, and as an assistant professor of aeronautics at the U.S. Air Force Academy. He is also a distinguished graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy. Mr. Sparks is passionate about educational public policy, and it is my pleasure to introduce him to you today.
Thank you, Dr. Davidson. Our lives have had a lot of parallels. In fact, I just met with another Air Force Academy grad, Senator Owen Hill, who's running for Congress down in Colorado Springs. And we had a very passionate conversation allowed around what we're talking about here today. I didn't know it was National Volunteers Week. At this museum, we have 1,900 volunteers. We couldn't open our doors without the volunteers, and that's the most of any natural history museum anywhere in the world. So we're very passionate about that. So this is really kind of emotional for me when I saw what the topic was here, because I grew up in a little coal mining town in southern West Virginia. And every house I could see was a coal miner. I'm not sure I even knew anybody that went to college. But when I was 9 years old, I had a wallet. And I didn't have anything to put in the wallet. But what I found one day was a little trading card, like a baseball trading card of an Air Force Academy cadet. And I put it in my wallet and said, I'm going to go to that school, and I'm going to become an aeronautical engineer and a pilot. And for 7 or 8 years, however long it took, from 9 years old, I thought about that. That was my vision, if you will. And I went to the academy, eventually went to MIT, went back to the academy and taught. And every single morning when I get up, I thank the citizens of the United States because they paid every nickel of my education from the time I was 6 years old until I got my master's degree at MIT. And my passion in life is to give back to the citizens of the United States way more than they ever imagined when they paid for that education. So I think this idea of military and public service is something that I hold in my heart very, very dearly. Right now, our country, we're doing well economically, we're doing well militarily, but we're not doing well emotionally. I think we've broken off into our tribes. We no longer think of ourselves as one peoples. We think of ourselves as groups of folks who sometimes come together, but in many cases we like to fuss with each other. And I think serving the country in some capacity, either in the military or as a public servant. If we had more people doing that, I think we would become one country a lot sooner. So thank you for what all of you are doing. Hope you make lots of progress and enjoy yourselves while you're at the museum. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Sparks, if you could just stay 1 minute. On behalf of the commission, we just want to present you with this certificate of appreciation for hosting us today.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, George, for your remarks, for your service, and especially for hosting us at this absolutely amazing museum. I have yet to have enough time to actually explore all of it, but especially the dinosaurs, which are everywhere, apparently. Oh, you heard that. Very excellent. So next, we're thrilled to have the director of the Colorado Outdoor Recreation Industry Office, Mr. Luis Benitez. Mr. Benitez stepped into the director role when the agency was established in 2015. Previously, he conducted mountaineering, climbing, and skiing courses for the Outward Bound Professional Development Program. Mr. Benitez has also led parties of climbers to the summit of some of the Earth's most imposing peaks, including Mount Everest, 6 times, he told me, right? And the famed 7 summits. He has helped create the nonprofit Trekking for Kids, which focuses on service-based expeditions, allowing participants to climb and trek while teaching them about local issues. And he has worked closely with Warriors to Summits, a nonprofit organization focusing on serving returning veterans by connecting them to the great outdoors. It is my pleasure to introduce Luis Benitez. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Davidson. I really appreciate being here. Thank you to all the commissioners. George, thank you for hosting us. This is kind of one of my favorite spaces to hang out. So what I'd like to talk to you today about a little bit in my brief time with you is why. Why is this concept of service to your community, to your economy, to your ecosystem that you live in important? So I'm going to share with you a personal story that involves Mount Everest, the Dalai Lama, and the call to serve. All in 8 minutes. How does that sound? Think I can get there? Challenge, right? Very good. All right. So when I started out as a climbing guide, that's ultimately professionally all I ever wanted to do. My entire sum of ambition in my life was to own a guide service and to hopefully someday climb Mount Everest. Being a wheezy asthmatic kid from the Midwest, those two things didn't necessarily connect. But when I found a National Geographic magazine that talked about the first American trip to Mount Everest and realized that the first American to climb Everest, Jim Whittaker, also had asthma, I showed this to my parents and I said, this is what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be a mountain guide. I want to climb Mount Everest. So whenever anybody would ask me, little boy, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'd tell them I want to be a mountain guide. I want to climb Mount Everest. And then I'd take a hit off of my inhaler and I'd go wheezing down the road. But it's this idea of passion driving your profession. How do you define your why when you make the choices that you make professionally? And does the mentality that you have personally sustain you through that progress? So fast forward a number of years to find me globetrotting, guiding the 7 summits, being able to do exactly what I wanted to do as the chief operating officer of a guiding company out of New Zealand. So if you've read the book Into Thin Air, or if you've seen the movie Everest, my job was getting Adventure Consultants back to being a global brand after we lost our CEO on Everest in 1996. So on paper, I was doing everything that I wanted to do. And in 2006, I was guiding on a mountain between Tibet and Nepal called Cho-Oyu. It's the 6th highest mountain in the world, and there's a low pass right next to this mountain that Tibetan refugees would utilize to leave Tibet, cross through Nepal, and get to Dharamsala, India, where the Dalai Lama resides and the Tibetan government in exile also resides. Now, as guides, we all knew this, and this was a normal part of operations that you would see a group of refugees cross the pass, an 18,000-foot pass, going across Nepal and into India to get to Dharamsala. And one day, when we were getting ready to leave base camp for our summit attempt, we heard outside our tent door what sounded like firecrackers. Knowing that nobody brings firecrackers to a base camp at 15,000 feet, we all ran outside to see what was going on. And what we saw a half a mile away from base camp was Border Patrol soldiers kneeling down in the snow, taking aim and shooting indiscriminately at these refugees trying to escape the country. Now imagine being a part of an international community of climbers, seeing this happen, realizing that a bunch of people have satellite telephones, so surely someone was going to call this incident in to the global media. That's what my thought process was. So at that point, with more soldiers coming into base camp, I told my clients, you know what, our business here is climbing this mountain, so we're going to continue on to Camp 1 and to Camp 2, go for the summit, because by the time we come down, surely someone, somewhere in this base camp will have called this international incident in to the global media. Metaphorically, basically saying somebody else is responsible for talking about this, not me. I'm a mountain guide. That's what I always wanted to be. It's not my responsibility. Came down 3 days later, started asking around to the other guiding companies that had satellite phone technology, what's the world saying? Have you actually called this in? And to a person, every single one of them said, we didn't call anyone. We don't want to lose our permits to operate in this country. We employ Tibetans. We help the economy. This isn't our business. This is a political incident. Best just to not get involved. At this point, I got pretty upset because I realized that the industry that I loved, the economy that I was deeply passionate about for my entire life, its moral compass was broken. So I crawled into my tent. I called a friend who at that time was a senior editor for Reuters news agency. I wrote an article, sent it via the satellite phone. It hit the World Wide Web, and all hell broke loose. People wanted to know who broke the story. The soldiers came back into base camp and confiscated everybody's satellite phones. And I won't bore you with my own escape from Tibet story, but in essence, returning to the United States, wanting to affect change and try to find a way to tell this story while continuing to do the job that paid my bills, saw me at a moment of deep conflict, personally and professionally. I loved being a mountain guide, but I also started working for the International Campaign for Tibet out of Washington, D.C., because I realized from a human rights perspective that because I was immersed in this story, I needed to actually get involved in a different way. So through doing this work and kind of splitting my time between these two worlds, I was getting ready for what turned out to be my last expedition to Everest. And I was in my garage packing for the expedition. Have any of you ever climbed a 14er or gone on a backpacking trip? You know what it's like to pack in your garage. You count your Snicker bars, you fill your water bottles. It's kind of a busy process. Now imagine packing for a 3-month expedition to Everest. You hire friends to count the Snicker bars, you go to Costco 15 times, and you're packing 30 duffel bags to take them to DIA to fly cargo. This was the process I was in the middle of when the phone rang. And I picked up the phone, and on the other end, this gentleman said, "Hello, Mr. Benitez. My name is Lodi Gary. I'm the Dalai Lama's special envoy in Washington, D.C. His Holiness has heard about the incident that you witnessed. He's heard about the work that you're doing with the International Campaign for Tibet, and he would like to meet you." Here's what my response was, because it was so busy and noisy. I plugged my ear. I said, "Mr. Gary, thank you very much for the call. I'm getting ready to leave for Mount Everest. Please tell His Holiness that I'm flattered, but I've got to leave for Kathmandu in 2 days. If he's around in June, I'll try to stop by Dharamsala after the expedition. Thank you very much." Click, hung up the phone. I still had my hand on the phone because mentally I realized what I had done about 60 seconds later. And a friend came into the room and saw the look on my face and asked me who was on the phone. And when I explained who it was, he turned off the music and called everybody into the living room. And he said, "Well, what did you say?" And then that's when I responded, "Oh my God, I actually said no to meeting the Dalai Lama." And right when I said that out loud, the phone rang again. And it was the executive director for the International Campaign for Tibet. And she was laughing. And she said, "Luis, pop quiz. When the Dalai Lama's special envoy calls you and says that His Holiness would like to meet you, what do you say?" I backpedaled intensely and ended up going to Dharamsala to what I thought was going to be one of those political photo ops, a 5-minute meet and greet, a handshake, a pat on the back, and a wander down the road. And that was going to be an interesting event in my life, but no more, no less. Instead, through a confluence of circumstances with other people canceling their visit, it turned into a 45-minute conversation about culture and community with the Dalai Lama, his interpreter, and myself in a room in his private residence. I had the audacity at the beginning of this conversation to lament the loss of my career. I said, "Your Holiness, I've worked my entire life as a mountain guide. That's all I know. That's all I love. I went to business school for this. This is all I've wanted to do. And because of my work with ICT, I can't guide in Tibet anymore. I can't guide in certain parts in the world. I've lost friends. this is really challenging to me. The audacity of me, right? He laughed. He laughed so hard, and he looked me square in the face. Through his interpreter, he said, you know, Luis, I'd like to still be in Tibet, living in the Patala Palace as my people's spiritual and temporal leader, but instead I'm a refugee in a foreign country with a government in exile, so basically, young man, you can't always get what you want. Sorry. But what he said next changed the trajectory of my life, and I hope you will hear this phrase when the context of why we do what we do under the umbrella of public service gets raised today and tomorrow. He said, you know, Luis, sometimes we don't choose our path. Sometimes our path chooses us. And it's up to you to decide if you want to engage or not. And at that moment, personally and professionally, I realized I was no longer just a mountain guide. I realized that domestic policy and foreign policy, at every level that I could imagine, was going to become part of my professional trajectory. I came back to Colorado, ran for town council in Eagle, was getting ready to make a run for mayor when Governor Hickenlooper called 3 years ago to ask if I would like to serve as the state's first director to oversee a $32 billion economy responsible for over 200,000 direct Colorado jobs. Now, if you would have told that wheezy asthmatic kid way back when, who all he wanted to do was climb Mount Everest, that the burden of leadership combined with a human rights incident would guide me to this day, I would have told you you were crazy. And when it comes to public service, you have to pay attention to those magical moments, the ones that drive you through those challenges, that help the people around you rise together. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation over the next couple of days. And commissioners, thank you very much for having me.
Wow. It's an amazing story. Thank you. Thank you so much, Luis, for your remarks and for your service to Colorado, to the nation, and indeed to the world. Next, I would like to introduce Chairman Dr. Joe Heck to provide a brief overview of the commission. Dr. Heck served 3 terms in the House of Representatives, representing Nevada's 3rd District, and prior to coming to Washington, he served in Nevada's State Senate. Dr. Heck is an active member of the U.S. Army Reserve. He holds the rank of Brigadier General and is currently assigned as the Deputy Joint Staff Surgeon to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Dr. Heck is also President of Red Rock Government Relations. Dr. Heck, the mic is yours.
There we go. Got it. Great. Well, thank you all very much for taking the time to be with us this afternoon as we talk about the importance and value of service across all spectrum, whether it's national, public, or military service. What I want to do over the next 5 to 7 minutes is give you what we call Commission 101, just to let you know exactly who we are, what we're doing, and how we came about. We are a nation built on service. Volunteer service helped support our troops during the Revolutionary War. The 19th century saw the emergence of widespread service efforts through religious groups, launching organizations like the YMCA, the American Red Cross, and the United Way. Service is part of the American character. We might even say it's what defines us as being an American. That service is certainly a part of the history of Colorado, which hosts the home of heroes in Pueblo, the only hometown in America to have 4 living Medal of Honor recipients, the highest honor bestowed upon our armed forces. Now, service means many things. It certainly includes service in uniform as a military member, but it also includes those who serve as volunteers, teachers, federal government employees, and others. And it has bipartisan support, one of the few things we find in Washington nowadays that actually has bipartisan support. Not just now, but throughout our history. We can highlight efforts by every president, every administration, every political party to support the work that everyday Americans do to further the common good. Early in the last century, President Teddy Roosevelt founded the Conservation Corps. President Hoover promoted service as a way to address poverty and other social conditions. Various national service programs helped lead our nation out of the Great Depression. President Kennedy formed the Peace Corps, President Johnson the Vista Program, President George H.W. Bush founded the Points of Light Foundation to encourage volunteerism. President Clinton founded the Corporation for National and Community Service, which runs the AmeriCorps and Senior Corps programs. And following 9/11, President George W. Bush called upon Americans to devote at least 2 years or 4,000 hours in volunteer service during their lifetimes. These are but just a few examples. Yet never before has our country blended together military, national, and public service into a single effort. And that brings me to the National Commission on Military, National, and Public Service. The commission was the idea of Senator John McCain, a Republican, and Senator Jack Reed, a Democrat. Senator McCain recently said that they created the commission to be, quote, a catalyst for an important national conversation on military and public service, end quote. It's a conversation that, again, quoting Senator McCain, comes when our nation is at a crossroads. We must decide how we want to foster a culture of service among American men and women from all walks of life. We are indeed at a crossroads in our nation's history. Millions of American citizens volunteer and engage in service every day. Yet there is more that we can do, more ways to participate, more ways to embed service in the very fabric of civic engagement. And that's what the Commission is here to do. Our mandate is broad and aspirational, but we believe it can be the foundation for a movement. We intend to listen to the public, learn from those who do and do not serve, and make recommendations to foster a greater ethos of service and strengthen American democracy. As our name suggests, the Commission will focus on 3 broad areas of service. The first is military service. About 1.3 million Americans currently serve in the military on active duty, including about 47,000 right here in Colorado. And an additional 1 million serve in the active reserves and National Guard. But those figures represent just 1% of the adult population. Added to this are approximately 22 million veterans, including 383,000 from Colorado. Taken together, about 9% of the U.S. population over 18 has at one time or another served in uniform. But there is a growing disconnect between the general public and our armed forces. For example, in 1995, 40% of youth aged 16 to 24 had a parent who had served in the military. In 2016, that was down to 15%. And over the last decade, the number of youth that would qualify for and are propensed to serve in the military continues to decline. Currently, only about 26% of American youth would qualify to serve in the military, and an even smaller number are propensed to do so. Next is national service, service in federal, state, or local elected office or government employment. Currently, about 2 million people work for the federal government. Now, this number has been relatively consistent for the past 20 years, but the percentage of Americans that work for the federal government has decreased dramatically since World War II, from 2.4% down to 0.65%. More concerning is that of those 2 million who work in the federal workforce, only 6.2% of them are under the age of 30. Now, many people also serve in state and local government. In Colorado, for example, there's about 31,000 individuals employed by the state and thousands more that are employed by local governments. Last, but just as important, is public service. Many Americans give back to their communities through different types of volunteer and government-sponsored organizations, nonprofit and faith-based programs, foundations, and private companies. In fact, 63 million Americans volunteer each year. But that represents only about 25% of the adult population. Some of you may have heard of AmeriCorps, Senior Corps, and the Peace Corps. These are programs run by the federal government, and nearly 60,000 Americans are participating in these programs today. Now, in the last few slides, I discussed the decreasing or relatively low numbers of Americans that serve. With a population of 325 million people, we have to do better. A little more than a quarter of our population, 90 million, are 19 years of age or younger. The millennials and the Gen Zers, they represent a huge potential for this country if we can find ways to encourage a greater number of them to serve. Additionally, over 48 million people are age 65 or older, comprising about 15% of the total population. This is a growing source of untapped potential. Today's seniors aren't retiring like their ancestors. They have a strong desire to continue to add value. And some evidence even suggests that there are individual health and social benefits by staying engaged via service programs. That brings me back to what the Commission is going to do over the next 2 years. The Commission will focus on 2 primary areas. The first is an evaluation of the military selective service system and if there is a continued need for the program in its current form, if any changes should be made, or if it should be disestablished. The selective service system is commonly referred to as the draft, but they are 2 very distinct and separate things. One is the registration of males between the ages of 18 and 25 in order to provide a ready pool of available manpower to the armed forces in times of a national emergency. The other is the actual call-up, or the draft. That is, calling those up who have registered. Now, registration is required by law with penalties for failing to register. It's important to understand that currently there is no draft. In fact, the last military draft occurred in 1973. Congress would have to pass a law, and the President would need to sign it in order for a new draft to commence. So the issue is, do we still need a selective service system if we haven't had a draft since 1973? And if we do, should it exist in the current format, or should it be changed to more reflect the 21st century America? The second task the Commission will undertake is exploring ways to increase an individual's desire and interest to serve across all forms of service. We are particularly interested in understanding how Americans feel about service. We want to hear from people who serve, and we also want to hear from people who don't serve, from people who want to serve but are unable to do so for whatever reason, and from people who really don't see a need to serve or have a desire to serve. The Commission is made up of 11 commissioners, chosen by leaders in Congress from both parties and President Obama. They bring together diverse experiences from service in public office, the military, the federal government, and not-for-profit organizations. We are committed to a bipartisan approach to answer the essential questions on service that the Commission must address. Joining me in the leadership of the committee are 2 vice chairs. Mark Gearan, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, is the former director of the Peace Corps, and he oversees our work on national and public service. And Deborah Wada, former Assistant Secretary of the Army for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, who oversees our work on military service. Throughout 2018 and 2019, the Commission will be visiting locations across the nation for a series of events and public conversations. The goal of these visits is to listen to the American public, to ignite a conversation, and to build a national movement around service. This is a big task, and we need your help. And we need the help of your friends and your networks. And that's why we're here today. Now, Denver is our second visit. In late February, we visited Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And over the course of the next several months, we will visit Massachusetts, Florida, Iowa, Illinois, Texas, California, and Tennessee. We hope these trips will enable our commissioners to hear from Americans representing the rich diversity of this country. As part of our work, the Commission will explore a series of key questions that are listed here and that will serve as a guide for the public discussion that we want to have with all of you after the panel discussion takes place. And so this slide will come back when we open up the floor for public comment. We are encouraging the public to submit comments, thoughts, and ideas on any aspect of the Commission's mission, and to stay informed on the latest news from the Commission via our website, which is inspiredtoserve.gov, and our social media channels, including Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of which are Inspired to Serve US. So if you have a smartphone, we want you to take it out, and we want you to follow us, like us, and start tweeting about us using the hashtag Inspired to Serve. Input and reflections gathered from all of these public forums will be critical in shaping the Commission's recommendations. We truly believe that working together with all of you, we can sow the seeds of a movement that inspires more Americans to serve. Our vision is simple: every American inspired and eager to serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Heck. Now I would like to bring up my fellow commissioner, Mr. Steve Barney, to introduce our panelists and to moderate the discussion. Mr. Barney served as former general counsel to the Senate Armed Services Committee in the U.S. Senate. In this position, he was the lead professional staff member responsible for defense personnel programs, including support for the active force of over 1.3 million service members. Mr. Barney also served for over 22 years in the Judge Advocate General's Corps of the United States Navy, leading military and civilian legal professionals and staff at sea and ashore. Mr. Barney.
Can I invite you to join us? Thank you, Janine. Thank you for that very kind introduction. As our chairman mentioned in his overview, our goal is to transform our conversations into a series of conversations and recommendations ultimately for you, for the Congress, and for the President. And so to kick off that discussion, we're joined by three exceptional individuals today who embody service and who have given a lot to our nation and to Colorado. So on this panel, first, starting at the far end, is Mr. Fred Edson. Mr. Edson is the Executive Director of the Colorado Federal Executive Board. You'll find a copy of their complete bios, or at least summarized bios. These folks have done a lot of exceptional things, so their summarized bios, it's on the seat. I just want to point out a couple things about Mr. Edson. In addition to his service as the Executive Director for the Colorado Federal Executive Board, he served in various positions in the federal government, in the Department of Commerce, notably successfully representing the Department of Commerce as an economic recovery support function coordinator in the aftermath of the devastation of Hurricane Sandy in the state of New York. He's worked in other agencies of the federal government, including the Department of the Interior and the Air Force, and he served for 12 years on active duty in the United States Army. Our second panelist is Mr. Scott Segerstrom. He's the Executive Director of the Colorado Youth Corps Association. The Colorado Youth Corps Association, or CYCA, holds the largest AmeriCorps grant in Colorado, a 414-member program focused on conservation and restoration. He's previously served personally in 2 AmeriCorps teams. He has prior experience in service as a wildland firefighter and a ranger, and we're delighted to have him here as well today. Thank you. And finally, Ms. Vanessa Moore. Vanessa is the 2017 recipient of the Colorado Governor's Service Award and a Vista Leader. She enlisted in the Iowa National Guard as a combat medic in 2009. She completed a year of service in Afghanistan, and after completing her service in the Guard, she served here in Colorado for 2 years as an AmeriCorps Vista member, working with student veterans to ease their transition from military to civilian life and to help them achieve success in college. So would you please join me in a very warm welcome for these 3 exceptional individuals. Let me start off with you, Fred. You've spent nearly your entire professional career in service. One of the things that's really important to us is to understand how it is to encourage and to support people who would go into service. Could you talk to us about the pathways that led you to service?
I'd be happy to. Thank you. Before I do that, I need to do my public service announcement for the Colorado Federal Executive Board. What we do is collaborate, coordinate, and communicate with all the federal agencies in and around Colorado, and that includes the surrounding states. Started in 1961 by an executive order by President Kennedy. And so any of you who ever have questions about the federal government, what we do, or how we can help you in the Federal Executive Board, please call me personally. So, as far as I go, long story, try and shorten it up for you today. I grew up in a very small town in northwestern Pennsylvania, 300 people. I went to school at high school 10 miles away, 1,200 people. But I started reading when I was very, very young. And through reading, I found that there was adventure in the world that wasn't in my small community. And I knew that I had to try that. But when I was growing up, there really wasn't much of an opportunity to do that. What you got to do was graduate from high school, get a job, find a wife, buy a house, stay in the community. Not quite what I wanted to do. So toward the end of the Vietnam War, 1975, I volunteered for the Army. And it gave me that opportunity to travel. I went to Fort Jackson in South Carolina. I went to language school in Monterey in California. I went to crypto school at Goodfellow Air Force Base in San Angelo, Texas. And then I spent 3 years at the field station in Berlin, West Berlin, Germany, at the time anyways. So I got the opportunity to travel, but then I knew I needed to do a little bit more. I was very proud of the uniform and proud of my service to the country, but I needed more. So I went back to college. I got a degree, got a wife, joined the Army again. Went back in as an officer. My wife and I were both Medical Service Corps officers in the Army, and we got to go places like Massachusetts, New Jersey, San Antonio, Washington, D.C., Korea, and finally Denver, where we resigned our commissions and decided we were going to stay here and raise our children. It was one of the best decisions we ever made. After we resigned our commissions in 1992, we continued to grow our family. We have 4 wonderful adult children, 1 grandson who's about 6 months old now. And even though I still bleed a little bit green, if you cut me in the right places, I still feel proud that we focused on our family by staying in Colorado. After several forays into the civilian sector, I realized that I really needed to get back to public service. I got a job working for the Air Force at Buckley Air Force Base when it was still a National Guard base, and I've never looked back. Working for the federal government has given me opportunities to continue to serve my country and grow in my personal and professional life. I like knowing that I have a small part to play in continuing to make this the greatest country in the world. As the executive director of the Colorado Federal Executive Board, I get to work with great, like-minded people on a daily basis and help train the federal workforce of today for a better federal force tomorrow. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Vanessa, we had a chance to talk just briefly before we started today, and you told me a little about your service in the National Guard as a combat medic and then time that you spent in Afghanistan. Could you tell us a bit more about your experience in the military, why you chose to serve, your transition from the military to civilian life, and how that has affected the work that you've been doing recently, working with others to try and help them be successful in their careers and their transitions?
Yeah. So I'll start with why I joined the military in the first place. I was kind of floating after high school in that weird space. I grew up in Iowa City, Iowa, so University of Iowa was right there. It was kind of expected of me to go to college. But I found that I could not afford college. And so I had a very strong familial influence, like military. Both my grandfathers served. My father served in the Army. And so that kind of seemed like I'd been influenced a little bit throughout my entire life. And it seemed like a logical thing to do at the time to help me afford college and kind of give me a little bit of direction. And I decided to join the National Guard because I thought I could complete college simultaneously while serving in the military. But little did I know that I signed up for it and was put in a unit that was slotted for deployment right when I got home from my training. So I actually ended up doing a little bit more active duty time than I expected right in the beginning. But yeah, I spent a year in Afghanistan. I was actually deployed as a female medic in a male infantry unit. So I was one of 2 female medics on our COP in Afghanistan, kind of running alongside the grunts in a time when we were technically not supposed to be doing that. And so I very quickly was kind of thrown into this like in service piece and then quickly ripped out of it. When I came back to Iowa, your demob time, like the time you come back from Afghanistan to like reintegration time frame in the National Guard is pretty small and or pretty short. It's about 3 weeks. And we were all from different parts of the state, so it wasn't like we all came back together in a unit. It was like we were in a unit, but we were in different parts of the state. And I was not a huge state, but it's still a few hours from each other. And I was really only with 2 other people that I had been on this deployment with for the last year. And about 3 weeks coming out of country from Afghanistan, I was back to being a college student. sitting in classes with no one around me kind of understanding what was going on. So that was kind of my initial reintegration piece, and it was really a struggle. It was a struggle. It was really difficult. I can hide it well, so I can sit in a classroom and no one knows that I served in the military, whereas like men get asked about it and they're kind of forced to speak about it a little bit more. I was in this space where no one was asking me, and so I wasn't talking about it, and I kind of just shut down for years. I ended up dropping out of college because I just like wasn't finding my purpose. I didn't have a direction really. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and really struggled a lot. And continued to serve the remainder of my contract for 6 years with the Iowa National Guard while working as a phlebotomist. But I decided I hated that as well, so I ended up in Colorado and found myself kind of again struggling to reintegrate and find my purpose, and was incredibly broke, and not my mental health was suffering because of that, and that's definitely something that people struggle with, and ended up through a chance occurrence working in a student veteran center, and I found that it was like an instant, like a click. As soon as I was working with student veterans again, I was opening up about my own story, so that was helping me, and then also I had found that sense of purpose again. Being a medic, you are important, and I was not as important as a college student. But I had found that I was important to people again, and helping people was also helping me with my reintegration. And I ended up, the second mission program came along, and it was a wonderful opportunity. It was through AmeriCorps Vista, and I started working with AmeriCorps, and I have been here for 3 years. And it's been a really wonderful experience, and I'm getting all this opportunity. If you'd asked me to sit in front of a room of people and talk, like 4 years ago, there's no way I would ever do it. But because of these experiences and the things I'm doing, I'm getting a lot of like personal development, and also have found that purpose and that drive again, and it's really wonderful.
Great.
So.
If I could follow up a little bit on that experience you had, are there any particular recommendations or advice you would have for us as a commission, but also to educational institutions and other organizations on how we can better assist student veterans?
Yeah, so Colorado has been doing, like, Second Mission, we've done, like, the programs that we work with and the student veteran centers have jumped. I mean, there's been huge growth, and it's been really wonderful, but there's always room for improvement, and I think ensuring that we're sustaining what has been built up to this point. So we have some really great programs in place right now, like mentorship programs, and there's like some bridge programs, and there's some tutoring, other tutoring that's not just a mentorship. Things like that are really wonderful, and we've started doing more faculty training so that the faculty and staff can understand. I think something that maybe could be improved a little bit would be the advising. I think that's something that's like maybe the biggest piece, and we're kind of missing it, is that having that advice. Coming as out of active duty, and you're trying to like reintegrate, and you're trying to find your place in society, and you have no idea like what applies from what your service, what you did in your service time to in the real world, like what you can do. And I think that people get frustrated because they start college and they are on a little bit of a time limit with your GI Bill to figure out what they want to do, and they have no idea because they have been serving in the military, and they haven't really had to think about it a ton, or actually being in college is far different than what they expected. And so having a little bit better maybe advisor, like some career advising would be really wonderful. And also the sustaining of like the actual centers themselves. That tribe mentality is so important in making sure that everyone is kind of, student veterans are retained in higher education. Yeah.
Great. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Scott, you've dedicated your life to the Conservation Service, and now serving as this executive director for the Colorado Youth Corps Association. Can you tell us a little bit about your organization and how you are helping young people to go into public service careers that are focused on conservation?
Sure. So conservation corps are built, generally speaking, on the civilian conservation corps of the 1930s. So we take youth and young adults and we put them and employ them on crews to perform service to their communities all across Colorado. So here in the association, we're a little unique. Colorado has one of the most vibrant Conservation Corps communities in the country, and they are so strong and so diverse that there's a role for an association like mine to represent their best interests. So there are 8 accredited Conservation Corps in Colorado. We engage about 1,600 youth and young adults annually, so it is a huge sector for the state. We reach young people as young as middle school with service to their community, 1 hour a week, volunteering, instilling that sense of service, all the way through returning veterans and transitioning them into wildland fire apprenticeships so that they can have the next chapter of their service to the country. About a quarter of our members, a little more than a quarter of the members that serve with us, have their first employment with Youth Corps. And that's really important, and that's an impact that I took for granted until recently. We have an explicit mission of getting the youth and young adults in Colorado out of the chicken and egg scenario where they can't get a job to get experience and can't get a job because they're not getting experience, because someone's not giving them the chance to get experience. So we're very intentional about bringing people into the workforce for their first time. So they're getting evaluated by a supervisor for the first time. They're being accountable, showing up for service, and seeing a program through to the end. It's really powerful. So what type of projects do we do really briefly? The best way to think about them are land, water, and energy. So for land conservation projects, it's building trail, mitigating wildland fire, fence construction, historic preservation. We use traditional skills to restore old barns, homesteads, fence lines, you name it. So that's some of the coolest work we do. From the water standpoint, invasive species removal. Water is, of course, a critical issue here in Colorado. So kind of one of the tactile impacts we have is to remove non-native species that's restricting stream flow so that water rights owners get the water they need for their community. We also do riparian restoration, and in urban settings, water efficiency installation, aerators, high-efficiency toilets, you name it, so that low-income housing has cheaper utility bills. And when it comes to energy, CFL light bulbs, solar panel installation, and those sorts of missions. So there are a few ways that we help bring people into public service careers. The first is we are a valuable mechanism for the youth and young adults in Colorado to get really critical professional certifications. So things that are important, that open up the doors to future service. So that's certification in running a chainsaw, certification in becoming a wildland firefighter, becoming an applicator technician so that you can apply herbicide in sensitive riparian areas. These are industry standard gateway vocational credentials that really empower them to take the next step post-service into a meaningful career. The second piece is we offer skill-based experience, really transformative, life-affirming, once-in-a-lifetime opportunities to serve here in iconic Colorado. So, Conservation Corps perform active wildland firefighting. We work with some of our partners to get one foot in the black and serve on some of the small incidents around the state and get that service clock and that firefighter experience clock started. We offer them hours of experience running a chainsaw. So it's not just the credential, but they actually get trigger time out on public land, mitigating fire, creating defensible space, and doing, quite frankly, one of the most challenging and most rewarding aspects of conservation service there is in the country. We do all kinds of trail work and hands-on service to the community. So Conservation Corps are leading the effort to build the Continental Divide Trail. We partner with some of our valued nonprofits to build the high-altitude trail in Colorado. So those guys are on the 14ers. So they're waking up around 2 a.m., beginning work around 4 a.m., building trail in the dark up until about noon, getting down off the mountain before the lightning, the mid-afternoon dangerous lightning storms. Dinner is about 2 p.m. And crash in about 3 p.m. and do it again for 10 days at a time. So really burly, mental, physical leadership. And I think the last piece I would mention under skill is we have internships. We do single site placements with some of our federal partners so that they get experience in a really broad suite of options. Paleontology, archaeology, wilderness survey, you name it. If a federal partner can dream it up, we can find someone to do that service to the community. And I think the last piece that's really important for helping transition our members into a public service life, and potentially the most important, as has been mentioned, is our partnership with AmeriCorps. This is critically important to launching our members into the next stage of their life in a productive and meaningful way. So we serve 414 members just with my grant, and then there are multiple other grants of my member corps. So it boils down to this. Every youth and young adult that wants to join AmeriCorps in Colorado has a slot through Conservation Corps. And so that's really helpful to them. It creates first-generation college students. It reduces existing student loans so they're more quickly on the path to economic independence. But most importantly, it instills a sense of self-worth and accountability to their community and accountability to each other. It is a magical, transformative program that we're really fortunate to have.
Thank you very much. Fred, as we're beginning to wrap up this panel, I'm really struck by some of Scott's comments about how these programs can be so important to helping young people to learn the kind of skills and things that they need to succeed. It's an incredibly valuable thing. I wonder if you could help us to understand, and I think about your current experience and your current role, but also your experience transitioning to other types of work and things through your career. What are some of the barriers that you may have seen that you think we should be aware of as a commission as we look at these things? And are there any particular initiatives or efforts that you've seen, perhaps things that are being worked here in Colorado, you think would encourage more people to serve, whether it's in government or in public service?
Well, as Scott said, it's difficult to get a job, and so I applaud all the efforts that you're doing to try and get some of the young people involved in federal service. One of the most dynamic and motivational speakers of the modern age, his name is Brian Buffini. He talks about the mindset, motivation, and methodology of success. And I think those are some of the things that we need to include, not just in the federal service, but in military and national public service. We need to employ these three principles across the federal government to ensure the success of today's government and tomorrow's government. And to do that, I think what we need to do is we need to motivate and to be a motivator. So not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. I was fortunate enough yesterday to spend some time with my new boss, who's the J9 director for NORAD Northcom down at Peterson Air Force Base. And his vision for the future in government is mentorship. So mentorship and leadership development. And that falls directly in line with what we're trying to do and what we hope that the government as a whole is trying to do for not just this generation, but the future generations too. So get into a mentoring program if you're a young person. Volunteer. Don't be afraid to pay your dues. Do what it takes to get where you want to go. Find someone that you admire and ask them to be your mentor. And don't just listen to what they say. Apply it. Look for someone in your organization or read something that's been written by another great mentor in the past. Og Mandino, Zig Ziglar, Brian Buffini, Brian Tracy, Andy Andrews, Earl Nightingale. Any of those great motivators are mentors in the books that they've written and some of the talks that they've given. Look for opportunities to expand the circle of influence. And that's not just through leadership development courses, but in people that you're with. If you don't like where you are, look up and find someone else. And I know that the commission is talking about that too, and as far as leadership development courses go, not just for the leaders, but for the young people who are coming up through in the government right now. Zig Ziglar once said, people often say that motivation doesn't last. Well, neither does bathing, and that's why we recommend it daily. So find something that motivates you and learn to do it better than anybody else. Volunteer. Volunteer for the job that nobody else wants to do. Volunteer for public service. Volunteer. Get your name out there and do things that other people don't do. Don't just wait for opportunities. Go and find them. So
it's terrific. Terrific. Thank you. Thank you. This has been a terrific discussion. I've really enjoyed it. I thank you all, and I'd ask you, could you join me in giving a warm round of applause and thanks to our panelists today. Great. If you'd like to to join us, we'll let you go back and take a seat. While they're returning to their seats, and we're going to continue on today, we're going to pivot to the next portion of our meeting, and this is the Q&A portion, if you will. Let me just provide you some ground rules for what we're about to do as a group here. First, any member of our audience here today is welcome to share comments publicly for the commission. We ask that you please limit your remarks to 2 minutes in order to allow as many speakers as possible. If we find ourselves with the luxury that there's time left at the end before we come to our hard stop, I'll be glad to come back and revisit folks. But we want to hear from as many of you as possible who've taken the time from your day to come out and meet with us. The second thing, we ask that all remarks relate to the topics of the commission that our chairman covered in the overview. And this is where my test of my technical skills. Not bad. I'm trainable. So these are some of the key questions that we are taking to folks just like you around the country as we go out and we meet with people. We invite you to speak on any of these, and we'll just proceed through this. Now, as we do this, the third thing is we've got members of our staff here today who have microphones. Identify yourselves. There they are. And they're going to go through this audience, and we're going to respond to you as you raise your hands and give you an opportunity to speak. Last, in addition to any of the public remarks here today, we strongly encourage you, your families, your friends, the organizations that you work with, your acquaintances, to provide us the feedback through these comment cards that are on your chairs, but also on our website, which is inspired2serve.gov, and on our social media accounts at Inspire2Serve US. So, here we go. I invite you now, as members of the audience, to raise your hand if you have a comment, recommendation, or question for the commission. I'll select individuals to speak, so please be patient. As we work through this, I'll call on you, and the staff will bring you a microphone. The gentleman here on the center row, the checked shirt.
Thank you. I have a comment for the commission. I'm sure it's something that y'all have heard before, and I know that it's something that has been politically infeasible, but I certainly don't think the commission's recommendation should be based on what's politically realistic or not. I myself served in the Army for almost 5 years. I served for a couple tours in Iraq, and it was heartbreaking to me to serve with folks who only enlisted in the military because they were coming from the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, and because the barriers to higher education were so high. There's no question that I met and served with, and a number of folks were casualties, folks that, again, were only serving for access to higher education. And so I know the commission has heard this idea before, but I would really stress a recommendation for the creation of alternative non-military service with a grant of educational benefits. And I know that many folks in the Defense Department would be against this because it would greatly reduce recruitment, and they don't want that. But the reality is that you solve multiple problems by doing that. The first is you reduce the barriers to higher education, which are unsustainable, exponential increase in the barriers to state education. The second is that you remove folks from the military who, again, only want to be there for the benefits. And, this kind of bleeds into the draft question of morale and quality. You improve the quality. And, finally, like I said, it's the right thing to do. It's economically feasible. And, I would just really urge the commission to take a really hard look at that, solve multiple problems by doing it, the most important of which being it's just the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, the gentleman who was 2 rows ahead of that last speaker.
Thank you. My name is Edward Hasbrook, and the service of which I'm most proud is that in 1983 and 1984, I served 4.5 months in a federal prison camp for refusing to register with the Selective Service System. Draft registration was reinstated in 1980 in response to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. But if the U.S. had sent draftees to Afghanistan then, which side would we have been on? At that time, the U.S. was backing fighters, including those who would later call themselves the Taliban and al-Qaeda. The U.S. government put me in prison for refusing to agree to fight on the side of the Taliban and al-Qaeda. What does that say about whether we should trust the government to decide for us on which wars we should fight or on which side? I came here today from San Francisco to point out that, like it or not, draft registration has failed. Most of the people subject to draft registration have violated the law, and most induction notices would wind up in the dead letter office. Draft registration proved unenforceable, and the Department of Justice gave up trying to prosecute registration resistors 30 years ago. One of the questions for this commission is whether a draft would be feasible. As I discussed in my written comments, which I gave to the staff and I was told they would distribute to you, the historical evidence is clear that no draft is feasible today because noncompliance would render any attempt at a draft unenforceable. Draft registration is continued only because there's been no face-saving way for the government to admit that its power to conscript is constrained by the willingness of potential draftees to submit. I urge this commission to look closely at the issues of noncompliance and enforcement and to report back to Congress and the President that whether or not you agree with or even understand the reasons for our resistance, a draft is not feasible and draft registration should be ended. That's all I can say in 2 minutes. I would welcome an opportunity to engage with you further at one of your formal panels in the future.
Thank you, sir. The next is this gentleman here, third row.
I just wanted to ask, if we have an hour and each person has 2 minutes, if there are fewer than 30 people who want to ask questions or make comments, maybe we could just extend now, because mine's a little bit longer and I didn't see a lot of hands go up when we asked for that. How many people are wanting to ask questions or make comments?
Well, sir, why don't we do this? If,
okay, that's fine.
Well, it looks like we have a lot of folks who'd like to do this. Please go right ahead. And as I said before,
yes, thank you.
If there's an opportunity at the end, we'll certainly come back and give you and anyone else an opportunity to come back for a second comment if you like.
Okay, I'll read fast. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming to Denver today to hear citizens' input. My name is Matthew Nicodemus, and I live in Boulder, Colorado. I lead a life of service. I've been a draft resistor since 1978, which was 3 years after the end of the Vietnam-era draft registration requirement and 2 years before President Jimmy Carter reinstituted compulsory registration. During my freshman year at Stanford University, I learned about the military draft, and out of a deep instinct and knowledge of war that had been growing ever since I was old enough to watch the U.S., South Vietnamese, Viet Cong, and North Vietnamese body counts and anti-war protests on the evening news, I decided that I would never allow myself to be drafted. My choice was so rapid and complete that I immediately joined over 100 other students in signing a letter to then U.S. Attorney Griffin Bell declaring that, fully aware our actions could result in a prison term of up to 5 years and a $10,000 fine, we pledged to refuse compliance with any future military conscription. I joined Stanford Against Conscription and soon realized that I could never, in good conscience, avoid the draft by becoming a conscientious objector, knowing that others would be drafted to take my place in war. I understood that the only way to prevent or end military conscription and help end war would be to overwhelm the selective service system with draft resistance, and I understood that it was up to me personally to help build that resistance. I began working diligently to educate young people and the rest of American society about the draft and draft resistance, and to build a national resistance movement. I'll skip my 10 years of work on that and conclude thusly. Why do I tell you all of these details? I tell you so that you can understand that I and more individuals and organizations that you can imagine form a vast web and a strong wall of resistance to war and resistance to drafting people so that war can be prepared for, threatened, and prosecuted by governments. Should you move further toward conscription, there will be waves of new resistors who will be just as dedicated to the cause as I am. Our force against the selective slavery system will be mobilized and maintained as long as it threatens the health and well-being of our society and world. We will reach out to those it endangers those it plans to feed to the war machine, and we will encourage and support their disobedience to its compulsions. We're very experienced, we're highly effective, we're growing in numbers, and we don't give up. It will be best for everyone if you do the right thing and act now to abolish the draft, dismantle the selective service system, and focus your efforts on promoting nonviolent public service that will help reduce the likelihood of military conflict. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We have a person all the way in the back. Hi.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hannah Schell. I'm an AmeriCorps Vista member serving with the Denver Indian Center through my sponsor organization, Spirit of the Sun. This is my second year of Vista service. My first year of service was with City Year in Columbia, South Carolina. And some of the things that were mentioned were barriers to service. And I think one of the things I noticed in my first year of service, where I served with a Corps of 30 members, is that most of the Corps members came from more affluent backgrounds. And part of that had to do with the ability to live on AmeriCorps stipends, and most of them were college graduates. Now, one of the things that drew me to AmeriCorps service, not only my passion to serve, but was also the stipend. My first stipend helped get me through my first year of college, and that was also like working full-time and going to school. So I would strongly recommend that not only the educational award be increased, but also the stipend that Vistas live in, who have to provide their own housing. I think that would open up kind of the ranks to who has access to service and who can serve it, and to focus on kind of the skill development aspects of service. How can this be a bridge for people from lower income backgrounds like mine, use this to, create a career in public service?
Thank you. The next person is wearing the green sweatshirt. Yes, thank you.
Hi, my name is Maida Gonzalez. I'm 23 years old. I work for the Water and Energy program for Mile High Youth Corps. I live with my wife and 3 boys. We actually live right across the street from work in the Sun Valley Projects. And my favorite thing about working for AmeriCorps, which would be Mile High, is not only the benefit of getting the chance to go to school after high school. I never thought in a million years that I would want to go to college, but giving the chance to have that money, like I say, a secret piggy bank, basically, that is just put aside just for you to go to school is like just awesome. My also favorite interaction would be the client interaction. We work with a lot of low-income communities, and I happen to live in one. And just being able to give back, pay it forward, and before coming and joining, I'd never seen myself as helping the community, especially the community I live in, because it's every man for themselves in a way. But after working here, I've learned that I could give and hopefully get back. And I really enjoy it, and I hope other people get the chance to experience and just see what Mile High has to offer. And just the barriers would be like to be more detailed in the benefits. A lot of, when I first started, we had no idea about the benefits of AmeriCorps. It was basically the stipend, and it's not the greatest thing to live off of. And just to know that after this, I have my secret piggy bank waiting for me to extend my future and hopefully just create a future for my family. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. Yes, please, this lady in the second row, please.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Schooley. I work with an organization called Campus Compact of the Mountain West, of which MSU Denver is a member, and we're lucky we get to work with Vanessa on the Second Mission AmeriCorps program. I'm also an AmeriCorps Vista alum. It's an organization, once you're in, you just sort of never leave. You just keep coming back for more. I read your op-ed in The Hill, Dr. Heck, and one of the key points you made in that op-ed was around the access and opportunity to service across all sorts of difference, so across racial, ethnic, socioeconomic barriers that could be, or differences in our society, in which those are pieces that are really pulling apart right now. People from different socioeconomic groups are seeing each other and interacting with each other less and less and less as these divides get bigger. We're in a higher education organization, and I appreciated some of the comments around barriers to access that are very real for a lot of communities. Those are the same barriers that exist for service opportunities. We call it national service. I know up there you called it public service, working with AmeriCorps programs. The opportunity to serve is not on the little list of what you all are doing. You can inspire, make people eager to serve, but there also has to be the ability. For some people, it's just not a realistic possibility because of issues around poverty or access to those opportunities. Again, going back to the Education Award and then also the living stipend for members, in an area like Denver where the living stipend, is about 80% of it is spent on rent, because it's a high cost of living here. So if we really want to make opportunities for national service something that is open and available to everyone, not just for workforce development, which is important, but also for citizenship development and that sense of the great equalizer of being in community with one another, not service to, but service with, then we need to create those, or get rid of the barriers that are creating such challenges, except or unless you're middle to upper class and typically white person. And it would be a really great boon for our country if we could do that.
Thank you. The gentleman in the tie in about the fourth row back on the right. Thank you.
You know, listening to these comments, there's a disconnect here. The web address is a wonderful address, Inspire to Serve. I think everybody is behind the idea of inspiring people to serve their family, their neighbors, their communities, their country, the entire world. And then you ask questions about the military draft and forcing people into the military to fight a war that they may not want to fight. You know, when I was a kid, we saw it on our television. More than 50,000 young men forced against their will to go fight and kill and die. Now, anyone who has looked at American history knows you don't have to force Americans to defend this country. We've been willing to defend it when it's right, and sometimes I think we've been willing to defend it when it's not right. But to have this discussion about service, on the one hand, when we're talking about wonderful opportunities for people to serve, and then hidden underneath is whether we're going to continue to have this system that puts people in prison because they don't want to go along with brute force, with conscripting people into the military. It's just wrong. And this commission needs to abandon any idea that we're going to continue to have draft or draft registration. Don't expand it to women. Get rid of it. If you believed in it, you'd have a forum to discuss it. Instead, you have a forum to pretend we're talking about service when underneath it, the dirty little thing under the carpet, is that we're also talking about maybe forcing you to go kill someone or to die, and if you don't like it, we may throw you in prison. That's not right. It's not only that conscription's wrong, this dog and pony show is wrong. Decide whether you're about service, which is a wonderful thing, or whether you're about conscription. Do we need a military draft or draft contingency? There you go, I got it out. Is it still a necessary component of U.S. national security? I will close by saying the truth. It has never, ever, ever been a necessary component of our national security.
Thank you, sir. All right. This gentleman down here in the front, please. And then next we'll go to you, sir.
Thank you. I'm 78 years old, and I've been a lifetime volunteer, I think from the age of 12. I joined Boy Scouts, I joined Civil Air Patrol. I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. spent 28 years in the Marine Corps, got out, went into law enforcement, did a career in law enforcement, went back to school, went to school on GI Bills and AmeriCorps Vista stipends. I'm a two-time server, AmeriCorps. I have a law degree, I practice law. I have been willing to stand in the breach where others wouldn't, and I still stand there. Why did I do that? I grew up in an age where I looked around and I saw people who served. My father, my uncles, everybody I know served. They were in World War II, they were in Korea, they continue to serve. Because people that serve know what service and sacrifice means. But I think today's people that don't feel that same value in service is because they don't have the people to look up to. They don't have the heroes to look up to. I think people will want to serve. I still think people have said, don't do as I do, or don't do as I say, but do as I do. And the point I'm trying to make there is we need to stand up and volunteer so that the young people behind us will realize that it's the right thing to do. Because this is a wonderful country, and it will only stay that way if we're willing to stand in the breach and keep it free and keep it American.
Thank you, sir. This gentleman over here.
I'll give you a copy of this if you will put that into the record.
We'll be happy to accept your document for the record.
Thank you. My family has been a public service family, and my family has also been a military service family. Going back to my many times great-grandfather who served during the Revolutionary War, and what I've given you is the copy of the Declaration of Independence. And after the words that everybody remembers, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands that have connected them with another, you get down to the fine print. And what among the grievances that the colonists had with the Crown were for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us. That was a conscription of the households of America. The men who were coming up with the supplies, the women who were feeding the troops, the daughters of the household who were serving tea to the officers. And then you go a little farther, and he has trained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hand. Here you have conscription by another name, impressment of seamen into the Royal Navy. So I am here as a Vietnam-era draft resistor. My family has been in service to this country in many ways. Another grandfather was a superintendent of schools. My aunts, my parents were teachers. I have been a service-oriented person for all of my life since I can remember. The first time in a paper drive, pulling my little wagon down the street collecting scrap paper. But I have here the thing to say about your website motto, inspire to serve. Absolutely. What a number of other people have said here, enable to serve. But do not conscript to serve. Men, women, people of any age. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we'll go with Scott here, and then ma'am will follow up with you.
One thing I would just want to speak in support of in terms of easing the pathway to service is the hiring authorities that currently exist in federal law that ease the pathway from private to public service. So in my sector, specifically in the conservation sector, there's the Public Land Corps Hiring Authority. This law is critically important and has changed a lot of lives. To oversimplify, if you serve on a public land project, so if you're in a conservation corps and you do a certain number of hours fighting fire or building trail or supporting natural resources, you earn a a preferential application for a natural resource career. Veterans enjoy a very similar type of preference. That has been a really important passport for the next chapter of service. And if it's possible, they can be streamlined for sure, but if they can be expanded, if they can be reinforced, if we can open that doorway up to more youth and young adults, that's incredibly helpful. We just train our young people up front so they're aware of this opportunity, what they need to track, and when they graduate from our program, and similar programs like mine, it's not a youth corps specific, they have that launching pad to the next career. And I would just lastly say veterans are a great example, just to kind of keep a military scope, in that they come through our program and earn all of these wildland fire certifications and then have a very quick pathway to that next chapter of service through federal employment. So those hiring authorities that make our work possible, they are incredibly important, and they have been a stroke of genius that we'd like to continue.
Thank you. Right behind you, ma'am.
I want to face everybody. Okay, thank you. This letter was composed by a group of about 40 Quakers, so I don't think I will do it justice if I race through it. It's from the Boulder meeting of the Religious Society of Friends. It's written for this commission. Dear Commissioners, the Boulder, Colorado Religious Society of Friends, Quakers, thanks the Commission for the opportunity to provide its testimony regarding the matters of military and other public service. Our testimony is grounded in our belief that war is wrong and that violence is not the way to obtain personal, national, or international peace and security among peoples and nations. We do instead believe in the peaceful prevention of violence and war. We seek to build peace and security through pursuing and sharing developments in health, sustainable environment, equality practices, and non-discrimination among all peoples, regardless of race, gender, religion, ethnicity, or national origin. Security and peace is a condition that can only be achieved and must be shared between all parties, not something imposed by military force and the use of violence. Security is achieved when all parties can share in not being threatened by the other. It is a condition that lies between all parties. To the matters of selective service, the draft, and military service of the United States, we find that the current law requiring all males of draft age to register for military service should be eliminated. We also find that the proposal that females should be included in the registration for military service should likewise not occur. There should be no associated denials or limitations of public service opportunities and benefits, such as access to health care, education, admission, or financial aid to attend universities, driver's licenses, and any other social service benefits based upon state, local, or national requirements of mandatory registration for military service. If the selective service registration and draft laws are not eliminated, a clear and easy process should be established for registrants in active duty or reserves to declare that they conscientiously object to military service. This personal declaration of conscientious objection should not be tied to a particular religious belief or membership in a religious organization. The only requirement should be a personal moral conscience that violence against others is wrong. Overall, we find that the extreme militarization of the United States is destructive, creates enemies, and is counterproductive to the goal of world peace. Violence creates more violence. We strongly support major reductions in both military funding and aggressive international policies. Acknowledging that our nation has been in a state of perpetual war for more than a half a century, we advocate for sharing peaceful technologies, promoting international programs of equality, in education and economic opportunities, access to public health, clean water, air, and safe foods, and environmental protection and preservation. Excessive U.S. militarization also seriously drains our resources for developing equal opportunities for health, well-being, and peace within our own nation by misdirecting assets away from much-needed domestic programs for community resilience and opportunity. Regarding non-military public service, we firmly believe in service to others and to the natural world in which we all live. Our lives must be about service and sharing to make us whole. There are many ways to engage in such service to others, both in our personal lives and actions and in our vocations, be they in the public governmental sector or in private business or nonprofit activities. All such activities must always be conducted in nonviolent fashion. That is the key to being consistent with respect for life, respect for nonviolence, and respect for peace. These must always be the foundational criteria for public service. Again, we thank you for the opportunity to provide comments to the Commission. We look forward to possible opportunities to provide oral testimony at listening sessions in the future. Sincerely and in peace, the Clerk of Boulder Friends Meeting.
Thank you, ma'am. If you'd like to provide a copy of that letter to a member of our staff, we'll be pleased to include it in the record. Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Susan Gomez, and I live here in Denver. And I'm also have done a lot of volunteering in my life. But today I want to talk to you about Ben Salmon. He was a World War I conscientious objector. He filled out the registration form, and he said he would not serve because of his convictions of oh gosh, I lost my political, humanitarian, and religious grounds. Because of this, Ben was arrested and served nearly 3 years in military prisons. He suffered there, and he was given a dishonorable discharge from an army that he was never inducted into to begin with. He said, "There's no such thing as a just war." He was placed at one point before his discharge in St. Elizabeth's Insane Asylum in Washington, D.C. And there he was allowed use of a typewriter where he sat and typed out 200-plus pages of why his thought process and why he believed as he does, and refuting the just war theory. I'm in total agreement with Ben Salmon. I don't believe there's a just war either. I believe that no one should kill anybody else, and I certainly believe that young people should not be forced into a military where they will be forced to kill. And I'm going to end here with a quote from Ben Salmon. "Let those that believe in the wholesale violation of the commandment, 'Thou shalt not kill,' make a profession of faith by joining the army of war. I am in the army of peace, and in this army I intend to live and die." Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Hi. How are you? I'm well, thanks. May I? Okay. I prepared some remarks which I'll hand to you because I'm almost in the front row. but instead I'd just like to make a few observations. I do so as a former Navy pilot and as the father of a 28-year-old millennial. As I drove down here today, I wondered what this would be like, and I would like to compliment you on the way I think it is beginning. It is obviously open to anyone to speak. I think we feel free to do so, and I am pleased to see that the age range varies from that gentleman in front of me who said he was 98, me 78, me 73, and then down to youth who are currently volunteering. That's really great to see. It's also nice to know that you have bifurcated the tasks of getting people for the military and having service for public service or the nation, as is part of your title. I think you need to keep focus on both. And when I was driving down here, I thought I would have to lobby hard for doing the latter, the public and national service. But I'm pleased to see that most of the comments that we've had so far are about that and in service for that. I will close by saying that it was nice to hear the word passion beginning of the remarks from the Dalai Lama, no less, and that kind of admonition. It's a pleasure to hear and see the passion that is in this room, even if we disagree. And the word inspire, which is the first word in your various New Age Twitter handles and so forth, is actually an important part of what you've said your mission is, to foster an ethos of public service. That involves passion and it involves inspiration. And I would like to close with the thought that coercion, as in coercion of a draft or even selective service with its current penalties, has no place and is antithetical to inspiration and the passion that is evident in this room from those who have served.
Thank you, sir. And if you would like to provide a copy of those remarks, we'll be happy to include those in the record.
The original, and please pass them.
Yes, in the back, please.
I just wanted to respond and say I am proud of my military and my public service. So I served 7 years in the United States Army, 3 years as city council director, so a total of 17 years federal service. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe there was another hand there. Is that Antonio? Yes.
Sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Antonio Mendez. I'm the Executive Director of Serve Colorado. That's the Governor's Commission on Community Service. And we administer the state and national portion of the AmeriCorps program here. I'm one of those millennials that they just talked about. Hello. But I'm going to take that hat off and just speak personally. I'm also the son of 2 immigrants. And as I look around the room, I see a certain demographic somewhat overrepresented. If you think about Colorado's population, about 30% of our people are people of color. That's not represented here. And when I think of service and when we think of national service and public service, unfortunately there's privilege there tied into that conversation. So my parents were first-generation immigrants from the Dominican Republic. They got their education here. They started off as factory workers working in box factories in New York City. They got their degrees, and they're both now Columbia University graduates. They've always stressed education in me, and I had the opportunity to participate in some service experiences that were incredibly privileged. So I was an intern under the Obama administration, and in my class of 150 people, the 3 top common identity categories were white, male, and Harvard. I was one of 2 people from Colorado, and I didn't actually grow up here. I just went to law school here. I was from New York, but there was only one other person from Colorado. I think as we think about service opportunities, we need to think about social class and enabling that opportunities for others. It's hard to think about helping others when you're thinking about helping yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the woman about the 4th row up.
Hi. So just in continuation of that theme, I'll be really brief. I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and I'm currently an AmeriCorps volunteer. I think as a commission, just being able to back up the public loan forgiveness program would be a great start. I know for myself, I was really concerned when they talked about taking that away, because that is my avenue to paying off my debt. I think it'd be really shame if you didn't really put your money where your mouth is a little bit in support of that for future generations to come.
Thank you. Sir.
I'm Ken Goodson. For the sake of this comment, I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer that served 3 years in Bolivia. 75% of Americans who applied to serve their nation through Peace Corps over the past 2 years received a denial letter, not because they weren't qualified, because funding for the agency did not support the opportunities for those Americans to serve. The demand for Peace Corps' presence is high. The demand to serve in the program is the highest it's been since the 1960s. The funding doesn't support the reality. And on the AmeriCorps side of things, the education award that members receive is counted as taxable income. So while they may receive $5,700 at the end of a year of service to our nation, what they actually have in terms of purchasing power to move their life ahead is taxed, and that purchasing power is diminished accordingly. Those are simple fixes, and they're just about aligning priorities with how we cut budgets. Thanks.
Thank you. The gentleman back here, please.
Just a quick question for you to consider. There's been a lot of talk about barriers of access and so on, but many people, and I've read, and I'm going to use the military just because it's simple in this case, I've read recently that, 3/4 of the population of this country is not physically capable of serving in the military. So as you're going through your service discussion, consider the possibility of how those barriers to entry, not just in the military, but to other types of public service, may be a factor in preventing people from serving the public. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who has not yet had an opportunity to address us who would like to make a comment? The gentleman over here in the third row, please. If you could, just 1 second, sir. We want to make sure that we have a chance for everybody to hear you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So I just wanted to say some of what I want to say has basically been said, but so basically in the military, when you train soldiers, you train them how to kill, and that's a large part of what being a soldier is, and then they become a political pawn for whatever reason. It may not be right, they may not believe in it, but they have to go, they have to fight, they kill, they die. And so my point is can we work just as hard training soldiers for peace instead of training them to kill? And if we can work that hard on that goal, those goals, and what causes war? I mean, different factors cause war. So a lot of the countries that will go to war, it's because of internal strife or a bad government, different things. But at any rate, if we can work towards peace instead of just training people to kill, then we can work towards peace as a goal and make a peace force instead of a death force or a killing force. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment? If not, I said earlier that if we had an opportunity to go back and give others who had already had a chance to make a comment to follow up on their earlier remarks, we have a few minutes left, and I would invite you to do so if you'd like to. Yes, sir. The gentleman in the third row, please.
I spoke earlier about conscription. Let me talk about the other side, service. I share the feelings of others who talked about the inherent contradiction. There's a word for compulsory service, and that word is slavery. If you want to encourage any positive definition of service, it must be voluntary and completely separate from any system of conscription. You cannot have a system that serves both conscription and positive service. Second, military service is service to the cause of war. That's what it's for. If you want to encourage a positive notion of service, you need to separate it completely from military recruitment or incentives for military enlistment. Third, people can best serve and provide leadership, especially the youth leadership we so much need, by making their own choices. Service should not be limited to options approved by the government for nonprofit service. And finally, and most importantly, the largest barrier and limitation to the ability to serve today by young people is student debt that forces people to serve higher paying jobs. The best way to enable more people to serve is to free them from vocational training debt by recognizing education as a human right for all and shifting funding from education and job training from loans to grants, not tied to any obligation, but recognized as a right. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman in the, ma'am, would, okay.
Thank you very much again for this excellent conversation. And Edward here, he has commented in his earlier comments about the high and long-standing levels of noncompliance with the draft registration requirement. I'd like to give a little background from my own experience as an organizer trying to encourage that and support that. When I became eligible for the draft registration requirement, which began in the summer of 1980, I joined two other resistors in Chicago, one of them Edward Hasbrook, and announced at one of the numerous simultaneous press conferences around the country that we were proudly defying the selective service system. Our statements were broadcast throughout the country. Knowing I could end up incarcerated, I visited a federal jail with resistor friends, one of them Edward, to see what life was like inside, and I spoke with draft refusers of past eras to learn from their experiences. During the next 6 years, actually 10 altogether, but 6 years, I alternated between being a student and war resistance activist and a full-time organizer. I spoke to countless groups and individuals about the draft and resistance, publicly debated one selective service official, and interviewed two others in their offices. I was co-editor of Resistance News, the national movement newspaper. I counseled many young men and their loved ones facing difficult decisions about military service. I communicated, collaborated, and cooperated with war resistors all over the United States and in other countries. I drove 7,000 miles in 2 months on a 9-state, 44-city Western regional speaking tour. I had dozens and dozens of personal statements published or broadcast by news and other media, reaching millions of readers and viewers. I spoke at schools, churches, meeting halls, and conferences, and in numerous homes. I wrote and led crowds in war resistance songs and acted in numerous political theater pieces to convey the resistance message. And throughout it all, I met and was educated and inspired by the most amazing fellow travelers on the path to peace, people who were working just as hard and long as I on all manners of different important social change projects, who were growing powerful movements for a better world. I'll also note that due to the Solomon Amendments, I paid a penalty for my non-registrant activity. I lost my federal student aid for university, and as with all non-registrants, I was not qualified after that to get federal job training, or what's the third one? And financial aid, as I mentioned. So I have paid a penalty for my service, and I'm very happy to have paid that penalty to do what I felt was right. I hope that you will understand and reach out to and study the peace movement in this country so that you understand what we are doing. And I hope that you will acknowledge fully just how widespread, deep the noncompliance is, and if it's that level now, when a draft is reinstituted, and we pray that it will not be, it will be that much higher. Thanks so much.
Thank you. To the woman in the second row over here, did you have something? Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to make a comment? If not, then that brings us to a conclusion of our meeting today. Thank you again to our wonderful speakers and our panelists, but especially to all of you who took the time to join us today and to share your thoughts. We really do appreciate each and every one of you for turning out to do this. I want to remind you once again, we're very happy to take your comments on these cards. You can turn those in before you leave. Some of our speakers also reminded us about the website. I wanted to make sure that you all are aware. There was a comment, a question that was posed to us earlier on the deadline for comments in the Federal Register. So to clarify, the deadline for comment in the Federal Register has been extended, is extended to September 30th, 2018. And our website will remain open for comments throughout the duration of the commission. So we invite you to take advantage of those and to share your views with us. Thank you for joining us today. It's been an honor to visit here in Denver, and we're looking forward to continuing our discussion as we travel around through the country to encourage and hopefully inspire Americans to serve their country. Thank you again, and please keep in touch with us.